There is a specific kind of silence that falls over a stadium when a team realizes the game has slipped away from them, not dramatically, not in one catastrophic moment, but through a slow, suffocating process of being outworked and outthought. That is what happened to Australia in this match. The United States did not win this game in a single flash of brilliance. They won it across 90 minutes of disciplined, structured, relentless pressure that eventually broke Australian resistance twice over. The first goal changed the emotional temperature of the entire contest. Before it, Australia had reason to believe. They had shape, they had energy, and the crowd, which had been electric, was willing them forward. The moment the net moved, all of that shifted. The crowd's noise became anxious rather than expectant. Australia began to chase, to stretch, to take risks they had not needed to take in the opening phase. And the United States, being the organized, experienced side they are, punished exactly that. The second goal was not a coincidence. It was the consequence of a team pressing higher, leaving space in behind, and facing a counter-attacking opponent that knows precisely how to exploit those gaps. 2 goals, a clean sheet, and a result that felt both controlled and inevitable in hindsight, though it was anything but inevitable while the match was being played. That is the sign of a well-executed performance. It looks easy when it is finished. To understand this result, you have to understand what the United States brings through the center of the pitch and in forward areas. Players who combine physicality with technical quality in a way that is genuinely difficult to defend at international level. This match was defined by individuals who were not just talented, but trusted. There is a difference. The USMNT has spent years developing a generation that does not shrink on the big stage, and this performance was evidence of that maturation. Whoever carried the game in the final third, and the clinical finishing was a team-wide quality on display here, did so with the composure of players who have faced high-pressure environments before, in club football and in previous international campaigns. What was equally striking was the defensive contribution. Clean sheets at World Cups are not accidents. They are the product of a backline that communicates, defends as a unit, and has a goalkeeper who commands their area. Australia, a side with genuine attacking threat and players who perform at the highest club level, were held to nothing. That tells you something specific about the concentration and the collective defensive discipline that the United States brought to this game. The individual stories here fold into a larger team story. This is not a squad built around one superstar. It is a squad where multiple players are capable of defining a match. And that collective depth is, right now, one of the most compelling things about this version of the United States national team. For Australia, this result carries a particular weight. The Socceroos have worked for years to establish themselves as a serious force in international football, not just a team that participates in World Cups, but a team that competes in them. They have had moments that prove that was possible, but a 2-0 loss against the United States in a World Cup context, without managing to score, is a sobering reminder of the gap that still exists when the margins tighten and the opponent is structured and clinical. Australian football sits at an interesting crossroads. The country produces genuine talent, exports players to top European leagues, and has a passionate domestic competition. Yet converting that individual quality into a cohesive international team that can beat the elite sides consistently remains the challenge. This loss will feed that national conversation directly. For the United States, the story is different, and in many ways more interesting for being complicated. American soccer has always existed in a strange space, perpetually promising, occasionally brilliant, sometimes maddening. But there are signs, tangible ones, that something is shifting. A dominant World Cup performance against a respected opponent, a clean sheet, goals scored from open play. These are the kinds of results that start to move perceptions. The United States is not just a team that qualifies for World Cups anymore. They are a team that is beginning to impose themselves on them. Whether that development holds under the pressure of the tournament's later rounds is the question the entire football world is now watching. One of the most important tactical concepts this match illustrated is what coaches call defensive compactness, and why breaking it down is so much harder than it looks from the stands. Australia needed to create. To create, they needed to move the ball into dangerous areas. To do that, they needed to find space between the lines, that narrow zone between the United States midfield and defensive block. But the USMNT kept that space closed. Their midfield sat in disciplined shape, tracking runs, denying the passes that open up defenses. This forced Australia wide, where the threat is easier to manage, and funneled their attacks into predictable patterns. Here is the tactical principle: a team that keeps defensive compactness, meaning short distances between their lines, reduces the number of high-value passing lanes available to the opponent. Every touch Australia had in dangerous areas was contested. Every forward run was tracked. The passing options that would have unlocked the defense simply were not available often enough, or were available only for a fraction of a second before a USMNT player closed it down. This is not glamorous football to explain. It does not produce highlight reel moments the way an elaborate pressing trap does, but it is devastatingly effective, particularly against teams that rely on technical combinations to break down a defense. The counter to compactness is pace in behind, or set-piece delivery, and Australia could not convert either of those alternatives into genuine threats. The tactical battle quietly was won by the United States long before the final whistle. Results like this one inevitably trigger the ranking conversation, and in international football that conversation is rarely straightforward. Where does this place the United States among the genuine contenders in this tournament? A clean sheet and 2 goals against Australia is a strong benchmark, but the USMNT has a history of delivering impressive group stage or early round performances before facing more textured opposition and finding limitations. The more interesting debate, though, is about Australia. The Socceroos have invested heavily in infrastructure and youth development, in keeping their best talent in elite European environments. They have the players. So why does the results line still stutter against top opposition? Is it a tactical philosophy question, a mentality question, or is it simply that the gap between a top 15 nation and a top 30 nation is wider than development narratives suggest, and that closing it takes a generation of sustained success rather than individual tournament moments? And then there is the broader question this match raises about the state of international football in the Asian Pacific region versus the traditional powerhouses. As FIFA expands the World Cup and brings more nations to the table, results like this one will define which federations are genuinely closing the gap and which ones are still on the outside looking in. So let me ask you directly, do you think the United States is now a genuine World Cup dark horse, a team that could go deep and surprise the traditional powers, or is this result flattering them against an opponent who could not quite unlock them?